In the grand scheme of galactic civilization, humanity ranks somewhere between a curious anomaly and an evolutionary mistake. The Galactic Council, governing billions of species across countless star systems, had established centuries ago that genetic perfection wasn't just desirable, it was mandatory for any race hoping to claim relevance in modern society. Jack Morrison understood this all too well as he navigated through the annual convergence in the Grand Council chamber. Around him, the galaxy's elite displayed their engineered perfection like living works of art. Luminescent beings with mathematically perfect proportions floated past on anti-gravity fields. Crystalline entities sparkled with precisely calculated symmetry. Even the organic species had modified themselves into idealized forms that would make ancient Greek statues look crude. Ambassador Morrison, a silken voice cut through his thoughts, still embracing your species' natural state, I see. Counselor Lysandra glided toward him, her silver skin rippling with programmed patterns of superiority. Every movement, every gesture had been calibrated to display ultimate genetic refinement. Some of us prefer vintage models, Counselor. Jack smiled, deliberately showing his imperfect teeth. They have more character. Character? She tested the word like it was a peculiar specimen. Is that what your species calls its refusal to evolve? Before Jack could respond, the chamber's crystalline walls pulsed with deep purple light, the universal signal for silence. Grand Arbiter Velox materialized on the central podium, his perfectly symmetrical features set in an expression of grave importance. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, Velox's voice resonated at the exact frequency for maximum attention. We gather to address an unprecedented situation. King Zarthax of the Crystalline Empire has passed beyond the veil of existence. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Jack's diplomatic training kicked in, analyzing the reactions. The Crystalline Empire controlled nearly half the galaxy's energy production. Their king's death would reshape alliances for centuries to come. The king's will, Velox continued, his tone suggesting distaste, contains some unusual provisions. A hologram materialized. The late King Zarthax himself, his crystalline form radiating royal authority. Jack had met him once, struck by how the king's eyes held something rarely seen in this genetically perfected society: humor. To the Galactic Council, the king's recording began, I leave you a puzzle. To Ambassador Jack Morrison of Earth, I leave my greatest treasure, my daughter Princess Zalara, to take as his wife. The chamber erupted. Jack froze, certain he'd misheard. Marriage? To a princess of the galaxy's most powerful empire? Surely there's been a mistake. Velox's voice sliced through the chaos. The human cannot. Show them, the king's hologram commanded. Another image shimmered into existence, and the chamber fell silent. Princess Zalara stood before them, and Jack understood the reaction. Where most crystalline nobles possessed porcelain skin and perfectly symmetrical features, Zalara was different. Blue scales covered her form in irregular patterns, catching light at odd angles. Her ears tapered to elegant points, a trait considered primitive by modern standards. But most striking were her eyes, large, expressive, and completely natural, lacking the artificial enhancement universal among her people. How unfortunate, someone whispered. She never accepted optimization. Jack's hands clenched. The princess's hologram showed intelligence in those natural eyes, and something else, a carefully hidden pain that spoke to years of such whispers. Velox's voice dripped with false sympathy. Ambassador Morrison, given the unique circumstances, the council would understand if you wish to decline this inheritance. It would be cruel to burden you with such a challenging union. Jack stepped forward, studying the hologram more closely. The princess's scales might be irregular, but they created patterns he'd never seen before, like abstract art in motion. Her eyes held depths that the genetically optimized could never achieve, suggesting a perspective beyond their artificial perfection. I request to meet the princess, he said firmly. Velox's perfect features registered surprise. Ambassador, surely you don't. It would be disrespectful to make such a decision without meeting my potential wife in person, Jack insisted, using diplomatic protocol against them. Unless the council wishes to deny me this basic courtesy? The chamber doors parted with a crystalline chime. Princess Zalara entered, her scaled form casting prismatic patterns across the chamber walls. She moved with natural grace, head held high despite the poorly concealed sneers around her. Ambassador Morrison. Her voice carried musical undertones that no optimization could replicate. I apologize if my father's choice has put you in an uncomfortable position. Jack met her eyes, noting how they shifted color with her emotions. Your Highness, the only uncomfortable position would be failing to properly consider such an honor. He stepped closer, letting his natural diplomatic instincts guide him. Though I admit, I'm curious why your father chose me. A slight shift in her scales. Amusement. Perhaps, Ambassador, because you haven't yet asked if my condition is contagious. Jack couldn't help it. He laughed. Several council members gasped at the improper display of emotion. I'm more concerned with whether you'll mind having a husband who lacks any genetic enhancements whatsoever. Was that a smile tugging at her lips? I suppose I could have you optimized. Please don't. Jack found himself grinning. I've grown rather attached to my imperfections. Velox cleared his throat, the sound precisely calibrated to draw attention. Ambassador Morrison, while this is all very entertaining, you cannot seriously be considering accepting this marriage. Think of your career, the diplomatic implications, the social obligations. Jack studied Zalara's face, seeing past the so-called imperfections to the sharp intelligence beneath. He thought of Earth, where beauty came in endless varieties. He thought of the king's mischievous eyes and wondered what game the old monarch had really been playing. Grand Arbiter, Jack said clearly, knowing his words would be recorded for history, I formally accept King Zarthax's bequest and offer of marriage to Princess Zalara of the Crystalline Empire, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. The chamber exploded into chaos. Velox's perfect features contorted in shock, but Jack kept his eyes on Zalara, watching as her scales shifted in complex patterns that suggested she was struggling to contain strong emotion. Ambassador, she said softly, her voice carrying harmonics that made his skin tingle. You may come to regret this decision. Jack stepped forward and offered his hand in the formal crystalline manner. Your Highness, I found that the best decisions of my life were the ones everyone else thought I'd regret. As Zalara placed her scaled hand in his, the light caught her form in a dazzling display. Jack heard the whispers, felt the political storm brewing around them, but in that moment, all he could think was that he'd never seen anyone quite so perfectly unique in all his years among the stars. Well then, Ambassador, Zalara's voice carried a hint of challenge. Shall we give them something to really talk about? Jack grinned, squeezing her hand gently. Lead the way, Princess. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of a very interesting partnership. They walked out together, leaving the council's perfect symmetry in chaos behind them, and Jack couldn't help thinking that sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe were the ones that dared to be different. The private receiving chamber adjoining the council hall hummed with crystalline energy as Jack followed Zalara inside. Here, away from judging eyes, she moved with more natural fluidity, her blue scales catching the light in ways that made the room's perfect symmetry seem bland in comparison. So, Zalara said, turning to face him with a directness that defied noble etiquette, shall we discuss the real reason you accepted my father's absurd proposal? Jack leaned against a crystal column, studying how the light played across her features. You think I have an ulterior motive? Everyone has an ulterior motive in the council. Her eyes, a startling shade of amber, fixed on him with unsettling intensity. Power? Political leverage? Or perhaps you're collecting exotic specimens? Actually, I was thinking about dinner. He offered his most disarming smile. I hear crystalline cuisine is fascinating, though I might need help identifying what's food and what's decoration. A ripple of darker blue passed across her scales. Surprise, perhaps? You're either making fun of me or you're the worst politician I've ever met. But there was a hint of amusement in her voice. I prefer differently talented. Jack pushed off from the column, closing the distance between them. Speaking of which, you never answered my question about your father's choice. Zalara's pointed ears twitched slightly, a gesture he found oddly charming. Perhaps he lost his mind in his final days. It would explain a lot. Or perhaps, Jack suggested, he was the sanest person in this entire council. Before Zalara could respond, the chamber door chimed. Velas swept in, his silver skin pulsing with barely contained agitation. Ambassador Morrison, he said, pointedly ignoring Zalara, the council demands a private audience. We must discuss the implications of this unfortunate situation. Jack felt Zalara stiffen beside him. Unfortunate? He asked pleasantly. I'd say inheriting a brilliant and beautiful princess is quite fortunate. Velox's perfect features twisted. You mock our standards. No, Jack cut in, his voice hardening. Your standards mock themselves. You've engineered yourselves into such narrow definitions of beauty that you can't even recognize it in its natural form anymore. Natural, Velox spat the word. Look at her. Blue scales that grow without pattern, primitive, pointed ears, eyes that lack even basic enhancement. I am looking at her, Jack interrupted. I see someone who had the courage to remain herself in a society obsessed with conformity. I find that incredibly attractive. Solara's scales flickered with colors he couldn't interpret, but her voice was steady. Grand Arbiter, I believe questioning my father's will violates several council protocols regarding sovereign rights. The Empire cannot allow this marriage, Velox hissed. A human, and one who embraces such primitive values? As opposed to what? Jack asked. Values that judge worth solely by genetic modifications? That's not evolution, Velox. That's vanity masquerading as progress. You dare! I dare quite a lot, Jack smiled, but there was steel in it. For instance, I dare to suggest that if you continue to insult my future wife, I might have to file a formal complaint about discrimination against unmodified beings. I'm sure the trading partners from the Outer Rim would be fascinated to learn how the Council really views natural species. Velox's skin darkened to gunmetal. You're making dangerous enemies, Morrison. Better than making boring friends. Jack glanced at Solara, catching a glimpse of what might have been approval in her expression. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the princess and I have a wedding to plan. After Velox stormed out, Solara turned to Jack with a new look in her eyes. That was either very brave or very stupid. Why not both? He grinned. I find they often work well together. You realize he'll try to stop this marriage? Probably. Jack nodded. Just like I realize your father must have had a reason for arranging it. Care to share any insights? Solara's scales shifted through several patterns before she answered. My father saw things differently than most of our people. He believed our obsession with genetic perfection was leading us down a dangerous path. And nothing. But her eyes didn't quite meet his. That's all I know. Jack studied her for a moment, noting how her scales seemed to respond to her emotions in subtle ways. Well then, Princess, shall we go scandalize the council further by having dinner in public? I hear there's an excellent restaurant in the diplomatic quarter that serves actual, non-engineered food. You're not taking this seriously, she accused, but he caught the hint of a smile. On the contrary, he stepped closer, close enough to see the intricate patterns in her scales. I'm taking this very seriously. Serious enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, your father chose me because he knew I'd see you for who you are, not what others think you should be. Her scales darkened slightly. A blush? And who do you think I am, Ambassador Morrison? I look forward to finding out. He offered his arm in the formal manner. Starting with dinner, unless you're afraid to be seen in public with an unmodified human? Solara's laugh was like music, natural and unplanned. Oh, Ambassador, I think you'll find I stopped caring about public opinion long ago. She took his arm, her scales cool against his skin. Lead the way to your scandal-inducing restaurant. As they left the chamber, Jack couldn't help but notice how perfectly her arm fit in his, despite all the ways they were supposed to be wrong for each other. Sometimes, he thought, the best matches were the ones that broke all the rules. The stellar lotus floated among the crystalline spires of the diplomatic quarter, its traditional architecture a stark contrast to the genetically engineered perfection surrounding it. Inside, actual flames flickered in containment fields, a deliberately primitive touch that made most council members avoid the establishment. Jack guided Zalara to a corner table overlooking the city's glowing skyline. Heads turned as they passed, conversations dropping to scandalized whispers. The princess held her head high, but Jack noticed how her scales darkened slightly under the scrutiny. "I apologize for the stares," he said as they sat, "though I can't tell if they're more shocked by your natural beauty or my unenhanced features." "Natural beauty?" Zalara's laugh held edge. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Actually, diplomatic would be commenting on the weather or making small talk about energy quotas." Jack activated the menu interface. "I prefer honest appreciation." Her eyes narrowed. "Honest? You've known me for less than a standard rotation. Long enough to notice how your scales shift color with your emotions." He gestured to the slight purple tinge currently spreading across her arms. "Like now, you're intrigued but trying not to show it." The purple darkened. "You can't possibly—" "Also," he continued, enjoying her reaction, "your left ear twitches when you're annoyed. It's rather charming." "My ears are not charming," she said automatically, then caught herself as Jack grinned. "Stop that." "Stop what?" "Stop observing me." But there was less bite in her tone now. "Can't help it." Jack selected an actual non-synthesized wine from the menu. "Diplomats have it. Besides, you're far more interesting to observe than Velox's perfectly calculated expressions." A server drone approached, its visual sensors carefully avoiding looking directly at either of them. "Honored patrons, might I suggest today's engineered protein selection? It's been optimized for—" "We'll take the natural menu," Jack interrupted, "and a bottle of Earth wine, 2154 vintage." The drone's processors whirred in apparent distress. "Natural menu? But our scans indicate the lady is of crystalline nobility." "Surely?" "The lady," Zalara said coolly, "would like to taste real food for a change. Is that going to be a problem?" "No, no problem." The drone retreated hastily, its servos whining in confusion. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Real food for a change. The nobility subsists mainly on nutritionally perfect synth meal." Zalara's expression turned wistful. "I haven't had actual cuisine since my father took me to the Outer Rim markets when I was young. Before the optimization programs became mandatory." Her scales rippled with remembered pain. "Before I disappointed everyone by refusing them." Jack leaned forward. "Why did you refuse?" "Why didn't you accept enhancement when you became ambassador?" she countered. "Because I believe in working with what nature gave me." He held her gaze. "Your turn." Zalara was quiet for a long moment, her scales shifting through subtle patterns. "I saw what the programs did to others, how they slowly lost something, creativity, spontaneity, joy." Her voice softened. "My father noticed it too. That's why he—" She trailed off as the drone returned with their wine. Jack waited until it had retreated again before asking, "That's why he what?" "Nothing." But her scales flickered with anxiety. "We shouldn't discuss such things in public." Jack studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes. "Your father's choice of me as your husband wasn't random, was it?" "Ambassador Jack," he corrected. "If we're going to be married, you might as well use my name." "Jack." She tested the word, and he decided he liked how it sounded in her musical voice. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." "Actually," he smiled, "I'm beginning to think your father chose me precisely because I might understand exactly what I'm getting into." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing her scaled hand. "The question is, do you trust me enough to tell me what that is?" The touch seemed to startle her, but she didn't pull away. Her scales warmed under his fingers, shifting to a deeper blue. "I barely know you. Yet your father trusted me with not just your hand, but something more." Jack kept his voice low, meant only for her. "He saw something coming, didn't he? Something to do with all this genetic perfection obsession?" Zalara's eyes widened slightly and he knew he'd hit close to the truth. But before she could respond, A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A group of crystalline nobles had entered, led by a striking figure Jack recognized as Lady Severa, Velox's chief supporter in the council. "Well," Zalara murmured, "it seems our dinner's about to become a political statement." Jack squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good thing I have a talent for making statements." He raised his voice just loud enough to carry. "You know, Princess, you never did tell me how you feel about Earth's traditional marriage ceremonies. They're terribly primitive. Actual organic flowers, unengineered food, natural music." Zalara's scales flickered with amusement as she caught on. How delightfully barbaric. Almost as barbaric as that ancient Earth custom. What was it called? Dancing? The scandalized gasps from the nearby tables were worth it. Jack grinned. "Oh yes, completely uncivilized. Bodies moving to natural rhythms. No optimization required." "Ambassador Morrison," Lady Severa's voice cut through their conversation like an icy blade. "How unexpected to see you here, and with your new acquisition." Jack felt Zalara tense, but before she could respond, he stood and offered the crystalline noble his most diplomatic smile. "Lady Severa, perfect timing. The princess and I were just discussing wedding plans. Tell me, how do you feel about unoptimized celebration protocols?" The look of horror on her perfect features was almost worth the political capital this would cost him. Almost. But as he caught Zalara's eye and saw the suppressed laughter there, he decided it was definitely worth it. Jack watched the crystalline gardens shimmer in Earth's sunset, their faceted surfaces casting prismatic light across the embassy's terrace. The diplomatic reception was in full swing, but his attention kept drifting to Zalara, who stood near the edge of the gathering, her irregular crystal patterns catching the light in ways that made his breath catch. "You're staring again, Ambassador," she murmured as he approached, her voice carrying that subtle harmonic quality that seemed to resonate within his chest. "Can you blame me? You're the only person here who doesn't look like they were cut from the same perfect template." He offered his arm. "Dance with me?" Zalara's crystalline surface flickered with uncertainty. "The council members are watching. They expect me to maintain proper distance from the primitive human who's supposedly only here for show?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Let them watch. I'm tired of pretending this is just politics." A ripple of blue-green energy coursed through her crystalline form, what he'd come to recognize as amusement. "You're impossible. I prefer diplomatically inconvenient." He led her onto the dance floor, ignoring the disapproving harmonics from the crystalline nobles. "Besides, I've been practicing the traditional forms. Wouldn't want to embarrass you." As they moved together, Jack noticed the subtle differences in her crystalline resonance, the way her frequencies shifted and changed, unlike the rigid, predetermined patterns of her people. It was beautiful, like jazz compared to a military march. "You're thinking very loudly," Zalara said, her hand cool against his. "I was just appreciating how your resonance doesn't follow the standard imperial patterns. It's like Earth music, always changing, adapting, creating something new." Her steps faltered slightly. "Most would consider that a flaw." "Most haven't heard Miles Davis." Jack grinned. "Speaking of which, I have something to show you after this. Consider it cultural exchange." Later that evening, in Jack's private office, holographic notes filled the air as "Kind of Blue" played softly through the embassy's audio system. Zalara sat perfectly still, her crystalline form vibrating in subtle harmony with the music. "This is chaotic," she said finally. "Unpredictable. By crystalline standards, it would be considered noise. But I find myself wanting to understand it, to feel how these patterns interact, create something greater than their individual parts." She turned to him, her surface shifting with complex emotions. "Like us." Jack's heart skipped. Before he could respond, Zalara suddenly stiffened, her crystal structure emitting a high-pitched tone. Energy coursed through her form in erratic pulses. "Zalara." He reached for her, but she backed away. "It's nothing, just a temporary resonance disruption." But her voice wavered, harmonics unstable. "That's not nothing. How long has this been happening?" She was silent for a long moment. "Since childhood. It's why I was considered imperfect. The healers could never correct the irregularity. Jack frowned. And you've never known why? My father, before his disappearance, he was researching something, ancient crystalline bloodlines. But his work was classified by the council. Her surface rippled with frustration. I've tried accessing the archives, but say no more. Jack's diplomatic smile appeared, the one that usually preceded him doing something inadvisable. I happen to know a few humans who specialize in accessing classified information, for purely diplomatic purposes, of course. Jack, no. If the council discovered, they'd do what? Break off the alliance? Threaten Earth's standing? He moved closer, hand hovering near her crystalline surface. They're already doing that, and I'm tired of watching you suffer for their precious standards of perfection. Energy pulsed between them, her crystalline form resonating with his proximity. This is dangerous, she whispered. Everything worth doing usually is. He activated his comm unit. Besides, I have a theory. Those flaws of yours, they're too specific, too consistent to be random mutations. Someone engineered them, or rather, preserved them. Working through the night, they pieced together fragments of classified data. Jack's Earth contacts provided access codes, while Zalara's unique resonance patterns unlocked encrypted files. What they found changed everything. These readings, Zalara's voice shook as she examined the genetic data. They match the patterns in ancient crystalline artifacts, technology we've never been able to activate. Technology that only responds to specific resonance patterns. Jack studied the complex diagrams. Patterns your father preserved in you, hiding them as imperfections. Before they could discuss further, the office door chimed. Lady Severa entered, her perfect crystalline form radiating disapproval. Princess Zalara, the council demands your presence. Immediately, her gaze shifted to Jack. Alone. Jack stepped forward, but Zalara's cool touch stopped him. It's all right, she said, her voice carrying new confidence. I think it's time we showed them exactly what imperfection can do. As she left with Severa, Jack noticed her crystal structure was pulsing with a new pattern, one that matched the frequency of the ancient artifacts perfectly. He smiled, remembering their dance earlier. Like jazz, sometimes the most beautiful things came from breaking the rules. The next few days brought a flurry of diplomatic activity. Velox and his supporters pushed for sanctions against Earth, citing inappropriate influence over a crystalline noble. But they couldn't explain why Zalara's supposedly flawed resonance could activate technology their perfect specimens couldn't touch. Your father was brilliant, Jack said one evening, as they stood in the ancient artifacts chamber. Around them, dormant devices hummed to life, responding to Zalara's unique frequency. He knew the council was trying to breed out the old bloodlines, the ones that could interface with the ancients' technology. So he hid that ability in plain sight. As imperfections, Zalara's crystal surface shimmered with complex emotions. All my life I thought I was broken, but he was protecting me, preserving something precious. You were never broken. Jack watched in awe as she interfaced with a massive crystalline console, ancient symbols flooding the air around them. You were just playing jazz while everyone else was stuck on classical. Her laughter resonated through the chamber, causing the ancient devices to pulse in harmony. A very human analogy. Well, I am a very human ambassador. He stepped closer, drawn by the energy radiating from her form. And as your official human cultural liaison, I feel obligated to point out that in Earth stories, this would be the moment where the kiss, when it came, sent sparks of crystalline energy dancing across his skin. It was different, impossible, perfect, like everything else about them. The council will be furious, Zalara said when they finally parted. Let them be. Jack grinned. Something tells me they'll have trouble enforcing their perfect standards once word gets out about the ancient tech only responding to imperfect resonance patterns. You're enjoying this far too much. Guilty as charged. He took her hand, marveling at how her crystal structure harmonized with his touch. So about those wedding plans I mentioned to Lady Severa. Zalara's form flickered with that now familiar blue-green amusement. You're impossible. I know, it's one of my many charming imperfections. Around them, the ancient devices hummed with power, their frequencies matching the complex, beautiful patterns of their combined resonance. A new song in an ancient key, perfect in its imperfection. The crystalline council chamber gleamed with cold perfection, its geometric patterns a testament to their obsession with flawless symmetry. Jack stood beside Zalara, their fingers intertwined as King Zartax's hologram materialized before the assembled council. My disappearance was necessary. The king's crystalline form shimmered with complex harmonics. The council's genetic purification programs threatened to destroy our connection to the ancient technologies, to the crystal nexus itself. Velox surged forward, his perfect crystal structure vibrating with rage. You dare accuse us of sacrificing power for aesthetic perfection? Zartax's tone carried millennia of disappointment. The evidence stands before you. My daughter, whom you mocked as flawed, carries within her the original resonance patterns of our ancestors. And the human ambassador, his gaze shifted to Jack, whose species understands something we forgot. That imperfection is not weakness, but strength. Jack squeezed Zalara's hand, feeling the familiar thrum of energy between them. You chose me specifically, didn't you? Because humans have a habit of finding beauty in the unexpected? Indeed. The king's form flickered with amusement. Though I must admit, I didn't anticipate quite such a passionate appreciation of our genetic diversity. Zalara's surface rippled with embarrassment, but Jack just grinned. What can I say? I'm a sucker for unique frequency patterns. Velox's perfect features contorted with disgust. This is absurd. The crystal nexus is nothing but a myth, a story to frighten children about our impure past. Guards, arrest these! The chamber floor suddenly blazed with ancient symbols as Zalara stepped forward, her crystalline form pulsing with power. The guards' weapons crumbled to dust, their perfect crystalline structures unable to maintain cohesion in the presence of her raw, unfiltered resonance. The nexus is very real, counselor, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the entire chamber vibrate. As real as the genetic modifications you use to eliminate its activation patterns from your bloodlines. Symbols continued to spread across the walls, ancient technology awakening to her presence. Jack watched in awe as the chamber transformed, revealing itself as not just a meeting room, but a hub of the crystal nexus itself. You knew, Jack realized, studying Velox's horrified expression. You knew the ancient tech required these specific genetic patterns, but rather than adapt your aesthetic standards, you tried to bury our access to it. Perfect symmetry was everything. Velox's voice cracked with desperate harmonics. We could not allow imperfect patterns to what? Zalara's power flared, and suddenly the chamber was filled with holographic displays of ancient crystalline achievements. Vast networks of power and technology, all built on the complex, asymmetrical patterns she carried in her genes. To remind you that true strength comes from diversity, that perfection is not the absence of flaws, but the harmony of differences? Jack stepped forward, his diplomatic training kicking in. The Earth Alliance would be happy to help facilitate a transition of power, unless anyone else objects. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were steel as he surveyed the council members, many of whom were staring at their own perfect forms with new uncertainty. The next few hours passed in a blur of political maneuvering, but by sunset, the change was official. King Zartax's hologram presided over a short ceremony, officially recognizing Zalara and Jack as the new leaders of the Crystalline Empire, and by extension, the guardians of the Crystal Nexus. I now pronounce you united in both law and resonance, the king declared as Jack and Zalara exchanged ceremonial crystals. May your harmonics always find each other. The kiss that followed sent cascades of crystalline light flowing through the ancient chamber, the nexus responding to their combined frequencies in ways that hadn't been seen for millennia. Show-offs, muttered Lady Severa, but there was a hint of a smile in her harmonics. Months passed since Jack and Zalara had revealed the truth of the Crystal Nexus, and amidst the flurry of political change, one event had captured the attention of the entire galaxy: their wedding. It had been an unforgettable day, not just for the Galactic Council, but for Jack and Zalara. The ceremony was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Representatives from across the stars gathered, both in person and through holograms, to witness the union of a human ambassador and a princess once considered imperfect. The wedding took place in the crystal nexus itself, now fully awakened by Zalara's resonance. The air shimmered with light, each beam refracting off the crystalline structures in a dazzling display that echoed their love, bright, unpredictable, and defying all expectations. Jack stood at the altar, his breath catching as Zalara entered, her crystal surface gleaming in hues of deep blue and violet, shifting subtly with every emotion she felt. Her gown, a blend of organic silk and shimmering crystal threads, flowed around her like a moving galaxy. Jack couldn't take his eyes off her, and when their hands touched to exchange ceremonial crystals, the entire chamber lit up in response, the resonance between them reverberating through the ancient technology. Their vows were intimate, whispered promises shared not just between them, but also within the complex harmonics of their union. As Jack slipped the ceremonial crystal onto Zalara's hand, it pulsed softly, as if recognizing the permanence of the bond. And when they kissed, the Nexus responded with a burst of light so brilliant it left the audience in stunned silence. It was as if the universe itself had acknowledged their love, their imperfection, and the strength it gave them. Not long after their wedding, Zalara's pregnancy became the talk of the galaxy. The daughter of two worlds was a symbol of hope and unity, but the pregnancy wasn't without its complications. Zalara's crystalline structure, sensitive to both her emotions and the development of the child within her, began to shift in new and unexpected ways. Her body flickered between harmonious resonance and chaotic fluctuations, a visual reminder of the uniqueness growing inside her. Jack remained by her side through it all, his hand often resting on her ever-changing surface, feeling the gentle hum of life beneath. He would often joke to lighten the mood, teasing her about their daughter inheriting all of her mother's royal stubbornness. Zalara, her crystal surface flashing with amusement and affection, would counter by insisting the child would certainly inherit Jack's mischievous nature. Despite the challenges, Zalara's pregnancy was a journey of discovery. Each day brought new harmonics, strange resonances, and an undeniable connection between her, Jack, and their child. Jack would often play earth music for Zalara, the soft jazz melodies resonating with her crystalline form in ways that soothed her during the more turbulent moments. The growing life within her would pulse gently in response, a soft rhythm that Jack found more beautiful than any symphony. As her due date approached, the crystal nexus seemed to respond to Zalara's heightened energy. The ancient artifacts hummed with anticipation, as if the galaxy itself awaited the arrival of their child. And then, on a quiet evening beneath the stars, with Jack holding her hand, Zalara gave birth to a beautiful daughter, a child who was a perfect blend of both her parents, part crystal, part organic. The little girl shimmered with light, her eyes reflecting the complexity of her mother's crystalline heritage and the warmth of her father's humanity. Her first cry sent a wave of harmonic frequencies through the nexus, activating ancient technology that hadn't functioned in millennia. It was as if their daughter's very existence had breathed new life into the ancient structures, connecting the past with the present and ensuring a future full of possibility. 5 years later, the Galactic Council chamber was unrecognizable. The cold, perfect geometries that once dominated the room were gone, replaced by a vibrant blend of crystalline and organic architecture. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy filled the space, some perfectly symmetrical, others beautifully chaotic. All were equal under the new laws Jack and Zalara had established, laws that celebrated diversity and honored the strength found in imperfections. Another proposal for genetic diversity protection, Jack murmured, scanning the day's agenda as he stood beside Zalara. The symmetric purists are going to lose it. Zalara smiled, her crystal surface shimmering with amusement as she watched their daughter playing near the ancient control console. Now 5 years old, the child was a living miracle, a perfect fusion of crystal and organic life, entirely unique. Her laughter echoed through the chamber, carrying harmonic frequencies that made the ancient tech hum in response. activating systems researchers had been unable to understand for centuries. "She's going to be a handful when she gets older," Jack observed as their daughter manipulated the holographic displays with ease, creating complex geometric patterns in the air. "Like her father?" Zalara's surface flickered with that familiar, playful, blue-green hue. "I like to think she gets her troublemaking from your side," Jack teased. "You know, royal blood and all that." Their light-hearted banter was interrupted by the arrival of several council members, former supporters of Velox who had since embraced the new order. Now they proudly displayed their once-hidden genetic imperfections, having undergone treatments to restore their ancient bloodlines. The shift in their thinking was visible in their asymmetric crystalline patterns that caught the light in mesmerizing ways. "The Nexus Network reports are ready for review," one of them announced, her crystalline form glowing with subtle colors. "Power output has increased 30% since we stopped forcing the technology to conform to artificial symmetry standards." Jack nodded, his professional demeanor masking his inner satisfaction. "And the integration programs for non-crystalline species?" "Exceeding expectations. It turns out that many races have unique resonance patterns that can enhance different aspects of the network. We've been limiting ourselves for generations by enforcing a single standard of perfection." Their daughter's laughter rang out again as she effortlessly activated another dormant system. She was creating intricate shapes in the air, perfect and imperfect forms, dancing together in harmony, much like her parents. Later that evening, as Jack and Zalara stood on their private balcony overlooking the capital, they shared a quiet moment of reflection. The stars twinkled above them in asymmetric patterns, and throughout the palace ancient crystals hummed with power. Jack wrapped his arms around Zalara, pulling her close as they gazed out over the city they had helped reshape. "When I took this diplomatic posting," Jack began with a grin, "I thought the worst that could happen was an interstellar incident." Zalara's crystal structure pulsed with affection as she leaned into him. "Instead, you overthrew an oppressive regime, unlocked ancient technology, and married a princess. Quite the overachiever. All because I happened to find asymmetric crystal patterns attractive," Jack teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And now we have a daughter who's more brilliant than both of us combined." "She is remarkable," Zalara agreed, her form shimmering with pride. Their daughter's voice echoed from the nursery, accompanied by another surge of ancient tech activating in response to her presence. Jack and Zalara exchanged a knowing look, filled with love and wonder for the child they had brought into the world, a child of two worlds, perfectly imperfect in every way. The future of the galaxy was bright, filled with endless possibilities, and Jack knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Zalara would face them together. Partners in every sense, united by love, strength, and the beauty of their shared imperfections. As the years passed, Jack and Zalara's union became a symbol of change throughout the galaxy. Their love story, the unexpected union of a human ambassador and a crystalline princess, continued to inspire others across star systems. But it wasn't just their political influence that captivated the galaxy. It was the strength of their bond, the way their connection defied the rigid structures of the past, and how together they redefined the meaning of beauty and power. At the center of their new life was their daughter Zalara. As she grew, it became clear that she was unlike any child the galaxy had ever seen. Her crystalline and organic nature gave her unique abilities, an intuitive connection to the crystal nexus, the ancient technology that her mother had awakened years ago. Where Zalara had learned to control and harness the power of her resonance over time, Zalara did so naturally, as if it were second nature to her. Jack often watched her in awe, marveling at the child they had created together. In her, he saw the perfect combination of Zalara's strength and grace, and his own adaptability and curiosity. Her laugh, a musical, harmonic sound, filled their home with a lightness that made the challenges they faced seem distant. Yet even though Zalara was a child of incredible potential, she was still just a child, one who loved to play, explore, and test the boundaries of her world. One evening as Jack stood by the entrance to their home, he found himself watching Zalara as she played near the garden, her small hands tracing patterns in the air. The light of the sunset bathed the crystalline structures around her in warm hues of gold and amber. Each movement she made seemed to call the ancient technology to life. Holographic symbols danced around her, forming intricate shapes in the air. Zalara came to stand beside Jack, her crystal surface shimmering in the fading light. "She's growing stronger every day," she said softly, her voice filled with pride, but also a touch of concern. Jack nodded, his eyes still on their daughter. "She's going to change the galaxy, just like her mother." Zalara smiled, a playful flicker of blue-green lighting her crystalline form. "And her father," she teased, leaning closer. "You forget your role in all of this." Jack turned to face her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "I don't think I could ever forget," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple, his lips lingering against the cool, smooth surface of her crystalline skin. "You gave me a future I never could have imagined." They stood there for a moment, wrapped in the quiet intimacy of the evening, watching their daughter create new wonders before their eyes. Jack marveled at how far they had come, how their love had grown from a political partnership into something deeper, something unbreakable. Solara's 5th birthday was a galaxy-wide event. Representatives from every corner of the universe gathered at the Crystalline Palace to celebrate the child who had already become a beacon of hope. As the daughter of a princess and a human diplomat, her existence was living proof that the galaxy's future lay in the unity of its diverse peoples. The palace itself was a marvel, a blend of ancient crystalline architecture and organic design, symbolizing the harmony of two worlds. Every inch of it was a reflection of Jack and Zalara's vision for a future where imperfections were celebrated, where diversity was not just tolerated, but revered. Zalara, as curious and mischievous as ever, spent most of the evening playing in the Grand Hall, much to the amusement of the gathered dignitaries. Her ability to interact with the ancient technology fascinated everyone. As she danced and twirled, her presence activated forgotten systems, filling the air with shimmering holographic displays and harmonic frequencies that pulsed in time with her movements. At one point during the celebration, Jack found himself standing by a large window, watching as the stars glittered against the backdrop of space. He smiled to himself, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. Not long ago, he had been a simple ambassador, trying to navigate the complex politics of the Galactic Council. Now he was a husband, a father, and a key figure in reshaping the galaxy. Zalara approached him quietly, slipping her hand into his. Her crystalline surface pulsed with affection, and Jack felt the familiar resonance between them. "Thinking about the past?" she asked, her voice soft but playful. "Just reflecting," he admitted, turning to face her. "I never expected my life to turn out like this." Zalara raised an eyebrow, her blue-green hue shifting with amusement. "What, you didn't imagine marrying a princess and fathering a child who could single-handedly revolutionize galactic technology?" Jack laughed, pulling her closer. "Not exactly," he confessed, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything." They shared a quiet moment, gazing out at the stars. The light from the crystal nexus illuminated the palace, casting shimmering reflections across the vast hall. The music of the celebration filled the air, but for Jack and Zalara, all that mattered was the connection they shared, their love, their family, and the future they were building together. In the years that followed, Solara's abilities continued to grow. By the time she was 8, she had already mastered complex resonance patterns that even the most skilled crystalline engineers struggled to understand. Her natural affinity for the ancient technology was astonishing, and her playful curiosity often led to discoveries that advanced the Nexus capabilities in ways no one had anticipated. Yet despite her brilliance, Zalara remained a child at heart. She loved to explore the palace grounds, creating games with the holographic projections that followed her every move. Jack often found her in the gardens, constructing elaborate shapes in the air, her laughter echoing through the halls. One evening, as the sun set over the capital, Jack and Zalara watched from their balcony as Zalara played with a group of children from various parts of the galaxy. The mix of races and species was a testament to the new order they had helped create, one where diversity was celebrated and unity was prized above all else. "She's going to change the world, isn't she?" Jack mused, watching as his daughter led the group in a game of holographic tag. Zalara smiled, her crystal surface glowing softly in the twilight. She already has. Jack wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. You know, he said, his voice low and teasing, when I agreed to this diplomatic post, I didn't expect to become the father of a galactic prodigy. That's because you lack imagination? Zalera teased, leaning into him with a playful glimmer in her eyes. I always knew you'd be a part of something greater. He kissed her, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of all the years they'd shared, the challenges, the triumphs, and the love that had grown between them. As they pulled apart, they both turned to watch their daughter, who was now standing atop one of the garden's crystal structures, her hands raised as she created a complex, shimmering pattern in the air. The ancient crystals around them hummed in response, their frequencies aligning with Solara's unique resonance. Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, united by love, strengthened by their differences, and guided by the beautiful, imperfect harmony they had found in one another. Above them, the stars shone brightly, as if reflecting the light of the crystal nexus. And in the halls where crystalline nobles had once sneered at imperfection, a child of two worlds played among the ancient wonders, her very existence a symbol of everything her parents had fought for. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was just the way Jack and Zalera wanted it to be.